The morning sun filtered through the thick canopy of ancient oaks, painted shifting patterns on the floor of the secluded cabin. John Smith, as he now called himself, sipped his lukewarm coffee, the silence around him a balm he had come to cherish. For decades, this stillness had been his companion, a stark contrast to the cacophony of his past life. Here, deep in the Tennessee countryside, far from the flashing lights and screaming crowds, he was just John. No sequined jumpsuits, no roaring guitars, no frantic demands. Just the chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves, and the occasional distant hum of a tractor. He ran a calloused thumb over the rim of his mug, lost in thought. His hair, once a raven black, was now streaked with silver, though he still kept it styled with a faint echo of its former glory. The famous sideburns were gone, replaced by a neatly trimmed beard that, along with a pair of unassuming spectacles, completed his disguise. His blue eyes, however, still held that spark, that melancholic depth that had captivated millions. He still moved with an innate grace, though the hips that once gyrated on stage were now content with a slow morning stretch. Life here was simple. He read, he gardened, he walked the winding paths through the woods. Sometimes he'd pick up an old acoustic guitar, fingers finding familiar chords, a soft melody humming in his throat. No lyrics, just wordless tunes, echoes of the music that still lived inside him. Too precious and too dangerous to release fully. He had found peace, a tranquility he'd yearned for during the feverish heights of his fame. Yet even in this peaceful solitude, the world had a way of finding him. Or perhaps he had a way of seeking it out even unintentionally. This morning, it came in the form of an old crinkled newspaper left on his porch by his friendly, unassuming neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who sometimes brought him fresh eggs. He hadn't asked for it, rarely bothered with current events. But his gaze by chance fell upon a small advertisement on page 5. Historic Elvis Presley, collection, auction rare memorabilia. The words leaked out at him, like a jolt of electricity. His own name. The name he had shed like an old skin, the identity he had buried alongside his very public death. His heart gave a strange, almost painful lurch. It wasn't the shock of seeing his name that surprised him. That happened occasionally. It was the sudden, overwhelming wave of memories that crashed over him. The excitement, the exhaustion, the love, the loneliness, the impossible pressure, all tied to that name. He read on, his eyes scanning the details. The auction was set to take place in 2 days, in a medium-sized town, just an hour's drive away. A lifetime collection, they claimed, featuring stage costumes, personal effects, instruments, photographs, and never-before-seen items, the kind of stuff that would send true fans to a frenzy. A shiver ran down his spine, not of fear, but of an unsettling curiosity. What items would be there, pieces of his life he hadn't thought about in decades? Trinkets, garments, guitars that held countless stories. Who were these collectors who held pieces of his very soul? And what kind of people would gather to bid on them? He closed his eyes, picturing the scene. The hushed reverence, the eager whispers, the sharp crack of the auctioneer's gavel, people touching, owning pieces of him. It felt strange, like visiting his own grave, only to find strangers holding parts of his skeleton. He pushed the newspaper away, the ink smudging faintly under his finger. It was just an advertisement, a relic of a past that no longer concerned him. He was John Smith now, a man of quiet routines. To go there, to put himself in such a public place, even disguised, felt like tempting fate. It was reckless. It was dangerous. Yet a tiny, insistent voice in the back of his mind began to whisper, a voice that sounded suspiciously like his own long-dormant showman's instinct. What if he just looked? What if he could witness from the shadows the enduring echo of the man he once was? What if he could see firsthand how his legacy lived? The temptation was a subtle hum at first. Then it grew a slow magnetic pull that vibrated through his very bones. He stood up, walked to the window and stared out at the sun-dappled woods. The world beyond his sanctuary seemed to beckon a ghost of a past life calling to him. The quiet echo of his own name resonating from a forgotten newspaper had disturbed his peace, and deep down he knew a part of him was already listening. The advertisement lay on the kitchen table for the rest of the day, a silent challenge. John tried to ignore it, busying himself with his usual tasks. Pruned the roses, hummed along to an old gospel tune on his worn-out radio, even tried to focus on the new novel he was reading, but his mind kept drifting back to those bold words. Historic Elvis Presley. Collection auction. Each time his gaze strayed to the newspaper, a whirlwind of emotions erupted within him. There was the initial jolt of recognition, followed by a pang of melancholy. It was strange seeing his life condensed into items for sale. It felt like watching a play about himself, where he was both a star and a forgotten spectator. He remembered the frantic energy of those days, the relentless schedule, the creative highs, the crushing lows, the endless desire to please, to entertain, to simply be loved. He had poured his heart and soul into every performance, every song, and now pieces of that soul were scattered, bought and sold, like commodities. A wave of bitterness flickered through him. He recalled the countless people who had tried to capitalize on his name, his image, his very being. The hangers-on, the exploiters, the endless demands. Was this auction just another extension of that? A final grand exploitation of a life he had purposefully walked away from. But then another thought emerged. Softer, more persistent. He remembered the faces in the crowd, the tears, the joy, the genuine adoration. The fans who had truly understood his music, who had found comfort or inspiration in his voice. They weren't seeking to profit. They were seeking a connection, a piece of something beautiful. Would those people be there, the true believers? Pictured a young woman he'd seen once long ago holding a single wilting rose, her eyes shining with pure devotion. Or the elderly couple who always sat front row holding hands and swaying to every ballad. It was for them he had truly sung. It was their love that had fueled him. The temptation to attend the auction grew stronger, fueled by a complex mix of curiosity, indignation, and a strange, almost nostalgic yearning. What if this was a chance to see from the outside the lasting impact of his music? Not through the distorting lens of fame, but through the eyes of those who cherished it. He walked over to his closet, opening it slowly. Inside, among his simple everyday clothes, lay a collection of old costumes carefully preserved in garment bags. A glint of sequins caught the dim light. He touched the fabric of an old jumpsuit, feeling the weight of the embroidered rhinestones, so many memories stitched into that material. The sweat, the adrenaline, the roar of the crowd. He hadn't worn them in decades, but they were still his. His beard was a good start. The glasses helped. He'd need a hat, maybe a wider brim, something to obscure the upper half of his face. He'd need to walk differently. Less of the swagger, more of a deliberate, anonymous stride. He'd need to speak differently, perhaps. A slightly lower register, a different cadence. It would be a performance in its own way. The greatest one he'd ever staged, portraying a nobody. Fear pricked at him. What if someone recognized the way he held his head, the curve of his smile, even a slight one? The whole carefully constructed life of John Smith could unravel in an instant. The piece he'd found would shatter. He sat down heavily on his old armchair, running a hand through his hair. This was madness, utter madness. Why risk everything for a glimpse into a past that was better left buried? But then the counter-argument rose. Why not? He wasn't hurting anyone. He wasn't seeking fame. Not anymore. He was simply an observer. A quiet shadow witnessing his own history. There was a sense of unfinished business. A desire to close a chapter that had never truly been concluded. To see his legacy, not through tabloids or biographies, but through the genuine emotion of his fans. The quiet, secluded life was good, but sometimes even the most serene waters crave the ripple. This was more than a ripple. It was a tidal wave of curiosity and emotion. He had to go. He needed to go. Not as Elvis Presley, the king, but as John Smith, the man who once wore that crown. Seeking to understand its enduring weight, the decision was made. The disguise would be perfect, and he would be nothing more than a silent witness. The auction house was located in a converted old theater, its grandeur now somewhat faded but still holding an echo of past performances. As John Smith, Elvis pulled his wide-brimmed hat lower and adjusted his glasses. The disguise felt tight, almost a costume itself, but it was necessary. He took a deep breath, the air thick with anticipation, and pushed open the heavy oak doors. The immediate sensory overload was profound. The chatter of hundreds of voices filled the vast space, a low hum of excitement. The air hummed with a strange mix of reverence and commerce. Display cases shimmered under spotlights, revealing the relics of his past life. He saw them, his jumpsuits, smaller than he remembered, yet still vibrant with their sequins and embroidery. A guitar, its neck polished smooth from years of playing, a worn leather belt, even a pair of his sunglasses reflecting the gleam of the lights. It was like walking into a museum dedicated to himself, except here, everything was for sale. He felt a peculiar detachment, as if observing someone else's life, yet every fiber of his being resonated with the familiarity of these objects. Touched a display case, his fingertips resting just above a golden microphone, the one he'd used on countless stages. A shiver ran through him. So many words, so many songs had passed through that very instrument. He moved through the crowd. An anonymous ghost amongst the living, he heard snippets of conversations. "Remember when he wore this? My mother cried when he sang that song. I saved up for years for a chance to own something of his." The voices were filled with genuine affection, nostalgia, and an almost religious fervor. It was humbling. These weren't just buyers, they were pilgrims. A group of elderly women, their hair styled with a distinct southern flair, stood admiring a framed photograph of him from the 50s. One of them dabbed her eyes with a tissue. "He was so beautiful," she whispered, her voice cracking. John felt a lump form in his throat. He remembered those faces, those screaming girls who were now elegant grandmothers, still carrying a piece of him in their hearts. He saw younger fans, too. Teenagers with vintage Elvis t-shirts, eyes wide with awe. They hadn't lived through his era, but they had inherited the legend, the music. It transcended generations, a timeless appeal that he, the man who had created it, could now only marvel at from the outside. He saw the famous guitar, a J200. He remembered buying it. The feel of the wood, the way it resonated when he struck a chord. So many songs had been born from that instrument. It felt strange to see it behind glass, a silent testament to a vibrant past. He almost reached out to pluck an imaginary string, but stopped himself just in time. The weight of anonymity was both a blessing and a burden. Could move freely, observe without being observed, soak in the atmosphere. But he also longed for just a fleeting second to shed the disguise, to embrace the adoration, to tell them, "I'm still here. Your love still means everything." But that was impossible. The John Smith persona was his shield. His very existence now depended on it. He noticed the sheer volume of items, his personal effects, things he'd long forgotten. A worn address book, a tie clip, a small framed family photo. These weren't just objects. They were fragments of a life, a story, laid bare for the world to see and own. A strange feeling settled over him, a mixture of pride, sadness, and profound gratitude. Pride for what he had achieved, the joy he had brought. Sadness for the life he had lost, the person he had been forced to leave behind. And gratitude for the enduring love of his fans. A love that had outlived even his own supposed passing. The auctioneer's voice, a smooth, practiced baritone, cut through the hum of the crowd, announcing the start of the prelude. People began to gather around the stage where the major items would be displayed. John found a quiet spot near a pillar, his hat pulled low, his eyes scanning the faces. trying to understand what drew them here to these echoes of his own life. The air crackled with anticipation, and he felt himself, despite his calm facade, becoming part of that electric energy. He was back in a way standing among the very people who had made him the king, and they had no idea. As the preview began, the crowd shifted, forming denser clusters around the more prominent display cases. John, still observing from the fringes, let his gaze wander. He was looking for something undefinable, something beyond the commercial buzz. He was looking for a flicker of the genuine, heartfelt connection that had always truly mattered to him. And then he saw her. She was standing a little apart from the main throng, near a smaller display case containing some personal letters and old concert programs. She looked to be in her early 20s, with long dark hair tied loosely, and wearing a simple, well-worn denim jacket. Her expression wasn't one of excited consumerism, but of deep, quiet contemplation. Her eyes, a warm hazel, were fixed on an old, slightly faded concert program from 1972. John remembered that tour. It had been grueling, but the energy of the crowds had been incredible. He watched as she slowly, almost reverently, reached out a hand, her fingers hovering just above the glass, as if feeling the faint echo of the music, the excitement, the raw emotion of that night. There was a sincerity about her that captivated him. While others were discussing prices or the rarity of items, she seemed lost in the history, connecting with the man behind the legend. She wasn't holding up her phone to snap pictures. She was simply absorbing, her brow furrowed in a thoughtful, almost wistful way. He watched her pull a small worn notebook and a pencil from her jacket pocket. She didn't draw, but instead began writing quickly and intently. Perhaps she was jotting down song titles or lyrics, or maybe just her feelings. Whatever it was clear she wasn't just a casual fan. She was a devotee. Someone who felt a profound, personal connection. He noticed a small, almost imperceptible detail. Tucked into the front pocket of her jacket was a small, crudely drawn sketch of a microphone stand with a scarf draped over it. It wasn't professional art, but it conveyed a sense of genuine admiration. It was the kind of detail that spoke volumes about her depth of feeling. As she looked at another item, a set of old, personalized guitar picks, her lips moved slightly as if she were whispering to herself. He wondered what she was saying. Was she recalling a song? A memory? He felt an inexplicable pull towards her, a desire to understand what his music meant to someone like her, someone so authentically touched by it. He moved a little closer, positioning himself behind a tall man who was loudly discussing the market value of a gold record. From his new vantage point, he could just hear her soft voice. "Amazing," she murmured, her tone hushed, almost reverent. To have been there, to have felt that energy. She wasn't talking about owning the items, but about experiencing the moments they represented. It was a crucial difference. This young woman, unlike so many others in the room, seemed to appreciate the soul behind the objects, not just their monetary worth. He felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. This was it. This was the true legacy. Not the money, not the fame, but the lasting impact on individual hearts. It was a silent validation, a balm to the old wounds of commercialism and exploitation. He saw her turn her attention to a glass case, featuring a collection of his personal records, mostly gospel albums. Her eyes lingered on them, and a faint, gentle smile touched her lips. He remembered spending hours listening to those records, finding solace and strength in the raw emotion of gospel music. To see her connect with that personal, spiritual side of his artistry touched him deeply. As the crowd began to thin slightly, people moving on to different sections, she seemed content to simply absorb, to be in the presence of these echoes of a life she admired. John, still disguised, continued to observe her. He felt a strange sense of responsibility, a quiet determination to understand her, and perhaps to do something for her. This young woman, with her quiet devotion, had become the focal point of his unexpected pilgrimage. He didn't know why yet, but he knew he wanted to reach out, to acknowledge her in some way, even if she never knew who he truly was. The auctioneer finally stepped onto the stage, his voice booming through the old theater sound system. The main items were beginning to be presented. John found a seat in the back row, blending into the shadows. his eyes still occasionally drifting back to the young woman he'd noticed. Lily, he'd heard someone call her. A pretty name? The first few items went quickly. A signed album, a photograph, a worn belt buckle. The bids were brisk, prices escalating rapidly, driven by collectors and investors. John watched a slight frown on his face. It was all about the money, the acquisition, the status. He felt a growing sense of disillusionment, the commercialism overshadowing the genuine love. Then a hush fell over the room. As the next item was unveiled, it wasn't flashy or particularly grand. It was a simple folded white handkerchief encased in a velvet-lined display box. A small plaque beneath it read, "Elvis Presley's personal handkerchief used during his 1972 Madison Square Garden." John felt a jolt. He knew that handkerchief. Not just a handkerchief, but that specific handkerchief. He remembered the Madison Square Garden concert vividly. The roar of the crowd, the sheer energy, the feeling of absolute connection with thousands of souls. It had been one of the peak performances of his career, a night where he felt truly alive, truly in his element. He recalled, wiping the sweat from his brow, with that very handkerchief, tossing it into the audience, a simple gesture that had driven thousands wild. This one had been tucked away in his stage suit, given to his wardrobe manager, to be laundered, and somehow it had never been returned. It was a forgotten piece of that legendary night, a silent witness to a moment of pure magic. It wasn't a valuable item in the way a guitar or a jumpsuit was. It was just a piece of cotton, but it held a powerful memory for him, a deeply personal one. He remembered the feeling of triumph that night, the exhaustion, the pure joy of making music. His gaze flickered to Lily. She had moved closer to the stage, her attention now fully captivated by the handkerchief. He saw her eyes widen, a flicker of understanding passing across her face. She wasn't looking at its monetary value. She was looking at the story it held. The sweat, the emotion, the very presence of the king on stage. He saw her glance at the auction catalog in her hand, then look at the handkerchief again, a wistful expression on her face. He knew what she was thinking. It was probably a small item, but deeply personal. Something a true fan would cherish. He could see it in her eyes. A profound longing not for ownership, but for connection to that moment in time. The auctioneer began to speak about the handkerchief, detailing its provenance, its connection to the iconic concert. A truly intimate piece of history, he declared, his voice full of gravitas. Bidding opened and the numbers started to climb. Not as fast as the more expensive items, but steadily. John watched his hand clenching subconsciously. He felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to possess it, to reclaim that piece of his past, that tangible link to a moment of pure artistry. It felt like a part of his soul caught in a display box, and then he saw Lily raise her hand, tentatively at first, then more firmly. Her bid was small, clearly near her limit. He watched her face. A mixture of hope and anxiety etched there. She wanted it. She wanted that specific handkerchief. He felt the conflict erupt within him. He could outbid her easily. The money was irrelevant to him. To take it from her, when he saw the genuine yearning in her eyes, felt wrong. It was a piece of his history, yes, but it meant something different to her. It meant the echo of a performance she revered. He hesitated, his gaze fixed on her hopeful face. He remembered the overwhelming love he had received from his fans, the pure, unadulterated devotion. This young woman embodied that. She wasn't a collector looking for an investment. She was a true believer. And that handkerchief, that simple piece of cloth, seemed to hold a special meaning for her, just as it did for him. The decision felt heavy, but clear. He knew what he had to do. The bidding for the handkerchief continued, a slow dance of escalating numbers. Lily, her hands still raised, looked increasingly anxious. Her bids were small, measured as if she were counting every penny. John felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He could see the earnestness in her posture, the silent prayer in her eyes. 100, the auctioneer called. Do I hear 110? Lily's hand shot up again, a determined glint in her hazel eyes. 110, she called out, her voice a little shaky but firm. Another bidder, a well-dressed man in the front row, raised his paddle without a moment's hesitation. 150, he boomed, clearly not challenged by the sum. Lily's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. She glanced at the handkerchief, then at her catalog. Her face clouded with disappointment. John could almost feel her heart sinking. He knew that feeling, the sting of wanting something so badly and seeing it slip away. Part of him, the old Elvis, the one who always wanted to give to please, yearned to step forward and just hand her the money. But he couldn't. His anonymity was paramount. Then 200. Everyone turned. It wasn't Lily. It was a man in the middle row, unremarkable in appearance, wearing a dark suit and a fedora pulled low. John recognized the suit. It was his suit, or rather, the suit he'd specifically bought for this event, the one he wore now. He had bid. He hadn't intended to. His plan was to observe, to perhaps buy, something small and insignificant for himself. A quiet memento. But seeing Lily's crestfallen face, the genuine heartbreak, something had snapped within him. Couldn't bear to see that item go to someone who saw it only as an investment, while someone like her, who clearly treasured the history, missed out. The well-dressed man frowned, then shrugged. 210, he said, surprising even himself. 250. His voice, though intentionally altered, still held the faint rumble that resonated through the room. Lily, who had given up hope, looked up, startled by the new bidder. Her eyes, filled with a mixture of confusion and renewed hope, landed on John. He quickly looked away, pulling his hat lower, trying to remain inconspicuous. He felt a sudden flush, a surge of adrenaline he hadn't felt in years. He was back in the game, in a way, bidding on his own life, but for someone else. The well-dressed man hesitated. He seemed to weigh the value of a used handkerchief against the sudden, unexpected competition. Finally, with a huff, he dropped his paddle. "Fine," he muttered. "It's just a handkerchief. Going once, going twice. Sold to the gentleman in the fedora for $250, the auctioneer announced, his gavel striking the podium with a sharp crack. A quiet applause rippled through the room. Lily, her expression a mix of bewilderment and faint relief, watched the man in the fedora, John, as he calmly made his way towards the payment desk. She didn't know who he was, but he had entered the bidding just when she'd given up securing the item that had meant so much to her. John paid in cash, his hands steady, though his heart hammered a little against his ribs. He felt a strange mixture of triumph and unease. He had the handkerchief, the physical link to a precious memory, but he hadn't bought it for himself. Not really. He had bought it for her. He glanced back at Lily, who was still standing near the stage, watching him. Her face was still etched with disappointment. Despite his successful bid, she still hadn't gotten the item. He had merely ensured it didn't fall into purely commercial hands. He now faced a new challenge. How to give it to her, without revealing his identity, without causing a scene, and most importantly, without making her feel like a charity case. He had the handkerchief, a piece of his past, but the real task lay ahead, to bridge the gap between his hidden identity and her genuine adoration, to turn this strange acquisition. The item was his, but the intention was for her, and he was determined to see it through. John, now holding the small velvet box containing the handkerchief, felt a quiet buzz of nervous energy. He needed to talk to Lily. He needed to understand her connection to his music, to that specific item. He couldn't just walk up to her and hand it over. That would be too abrupt, too suspicious. He needed a reason, a subtle opening. He saw her lingering near the exit, still looking a little forlorn. She was looking at her small notebook, perhaps writing something. He took a deep breath, adjusted his hat, and began to walk deliberately towards her. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a low, gravelly tone, carefully modulated. "I couldn't help but notice you were interested in that handkerchief." Lily looked up, startled, her eyes, still tinged with disappointment, met his. She said, her voice soft, "Yes, I was. It's a beautiful piece." "It is," John agreed, trying to sound like a fellow admirer, not the original owner. "Do you collect much Elvis memorabilia?" She shook her head, a small sad smile playing on her lips. "Not really. I can't afford to. I love his music. It's been such a huge part of my life." Her gaze drifted back to the display case, now empty of the handkerchief. That one, though it was from Madison Square Garden, 1972. My grandmother used to tell me about that concert. She said it was like lightning, in a bottle, pure magic. John felt a surge of warmth as she got it. "Magic indeed," he murmured, a genuine smile touching his lips beneath his beard. "What is it about his music that speaks to you so much?" Lily's eyes lit up, and the sadness seemed to recede, replaced by an earnest passion. "Oh, where do I even start?" she began, gesturing slightly with her hands. "It's not just the voice, though, that's incredible. It's the feeling. He put so much heart into every song. Whether it was gospel, or rock and roll, or a ballad, you could feel it. The raw emotion." She paused, seemingly gathering her thoughts. "I'm a musician myself, trying to make my way," she confessed, a hint of vulnerability in her voice. "And when things get tough, when I feel like giving up, I listen to Elvis. He just poured everything into his art. He wasn't afraid to be vulnerable or powerful or tender. He was just real." John listened, completely captivated. Her words were like a balm to his soul, validating years of struggle, years of pouring his varied being into his performances. She understood what so many had missed or chosen to ignore. She saw beyond the caricature, beyond the king, to the man who simply wanted to sing, about giving everything you have to the audience. She looked at him, her eyes bright. "His music isn't just entertainment for me, it's inspiration. It's a reminder to be true to your art, to sing from the heart no matter what." She gestured towards the empty display case. "That handkerchief, to me, represents that intensity. The passion, the sweat, the sheer devotion to his craft on that legendary night." John felt a profound sense of humility and gratitude. This young woman, a stranger, was articulating the very essence of his artistic philosophy, the core of what he'd always tried to convey. She saw him not just as a legend, but as a fellow artist, a source of guidance and strength. He had come here seeking answers about his legacy, and she was providing them unknowingly with every heartfelt word. The handkerchief in her eyes was more than just a relic. It was a symbol of artistic truth, and he knew with absolute certainty that it belonged with her. Lily continued to speak, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke about her passion. "It's funny," she said, looking down at her notebook. "People sometimes dismiss him as just a pop star or a pelvis shaker, but they don't see the depth, the gospel roots, the incredible range. He could sing anything he was feeling." She looked up at John, her hazel eyes earnest. "I wish I could have seen him live just once to feel that energy, that connection he had with the audience. My grandma always said it was like he was singing directly to you, even in a stadium." She said he looked at her once just for a second, and it felt like the whole world stopped. He remembered those glances, those split-second connections with individual faces in the crowd. There were moments of pure, unfiltered exchange, a silent conversation between artist and admirer. To hear that it still resonated generations later was deeply moving. "He also taught me a lot about vulnerability," Lily mused, looking thoughtful. "He put himself out there completely. The highs were so high and the lows, well, you could feel those too in his later songs. It's a powerful lesson for any artist. You have to be brave enough to show your true self, even when it's messy or imperfect." She flipped a page in her notebook. "I've been trying to write a song lately about finding your voice, and his music has been my constant companion. It reminds me that every voice matters, every song can touch someone, no matter how small the stage." She hesitated, then added, almost shyly, I even put a little sketch of his mech stand with a scarf on my jacket. It's my little reminder to always sing with my whole heart." John felt a lump in his throat here. It was such a small detail, but it spoke volumes about her genuine, unpretentious devotion. She wasn't chasing fame, she was chasing the truth in music, just like he had. "You sound like you have a true appreciation for the soul of the music, not just the spectacle," he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. He wanted to tell her everything, to share the burden and the joy of his life, but he couldn't. It was too much, too dangerous. "That's what it is, isn't it?" Lily agreed, her face brightening. "The soul. That's what makes art last. It's not about how many records you sell or how many awards you win. It's about how many lives you touch, how many people you make feel something real." "Thank you for listening," she said. "It's rare to find someone who really gets it, who sees past the legend to the artist." John felt an overwhelming sense of connection, a bond forged not through shared history, but through shared understanding. She understood him better than many people who had known him for years. Her words were a testament to the enduring power of his art, a validation that transcended time and identity. He had always yearned for that deep connection with his audience, and here in this quiet corner of an auction house, he had found it. He knew with absolute certainty that the handkerchief, that piece of his past, belonged with her. It wasn't about ownership for him anymore. It was about honoring the legacy, about passing a piece of inspiration to a kindred spirit. She didn't need his money. She needed his symbol, a tangible link to the passion she so deeply admired. And he, the man who was once Elvis Presley, was in a unique position to give her exactly that. The moment hung in the air, thick with unspoken understanding. Lily's earnest words had deeply moved John. He looked at the small velvet box in his hand containing the handkerchief. It felt warm, almost alive, a conduit between his past and her present. He cleared his throat. "You know," he began, his voice still low, carefully modulated, "when I bid on that handkerchief, I wasn't sure why. It just spoke to me." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But hearing you talk about what his music means to you, about the soul of his artistry, I think I understand now." Lily looked at him, her brow furrowed in curiosity. John extended the small box towards her. "This isn't just a piece of cloth," he said, his eyes meeting hers, a profound sincerity in their depths. "It's a symbol of passion, of dedication, of giving everything you have to your art. You..." He continued, a gentle smile playing on his lips. "You understand that, more than anyone else I've heard today?" Lily's eyes widened, first in confusion, then in disbelief. What are you saying?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm saying," John replied, pushing the box slightly closer, "that this belongs with someone who truly appreciates its meaning, someone who sees it. Naughty. Heart of the music. Someone like you." Lily recoiled slightly, shaking her head. "Oh, no. I couldn't," she stammered, her cheeks flushing. "It's not really. I bought it on impulse, without a clear reason. But you gave it one. You gave it a purpose. Consider it a gift from one who deeply respects the power of music to another." He emphasized another, making it sound like a shared bond between artists rather than a benefaction from a king. He saw the struggle in her eyes, the humility, the disbelief, but also a profound longing. The handkerchief wasn't just an object to her. It was a piece of the history she revered, a tangible link to the inspiration she so desperately sought. "Please," he said softly, his gaze steady. "Take it. It means more to you than it ever could to me." It meant a great deal to him, but giving it to her meant even more. It was a completion, a silent benediction. Slowly, tentatively, Lily reached out. Her fingers trembled slightly as she took the velvet box from his hand. She looked down at it, then back up at him, her eyes glistening. Tears welled up, but she blinked them back, a radiant smile breaking through her shock. I don't know what to say," she murmured, clutching the box to her chest as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Thank you so much. This means everything to me." Her gratitude was palpable, her joy utterly genuine. It was a pure, unadulterated emotion that washed over John, filling him with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. This was better than any applause, any standing ovation. This was the silent, profound satisfaction of touching a single life in a meaningful way. "Just promise me one thing," John said, a twinkle in his eyes. Lily looked at him expectantly. "Anything." "Keep making music," he said, his voice imbued with a rare, quiet intensity. "Keep singing from the heart, and remember the real magic isn't in the objects, but in the feeling, in the connection." Lily nodded, tears now freely streaming down her face. "I promise. Thank you, Mr." She paused, realizing she didn't know his name. John smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that for a fleeting moment stripped away the years and the disguise. "Just John," he said, his voice soft, almost a sigh of contentment. "Just John." He saw her glance down at the box again, her expression one of utter wonder. He knew she wouldn't forget this moment. And he knew deep in his heart that this small act of giving was more meaningful than any performance he had ever given, any record he had ever sold. He had passed on a flame a small piece of his legacy to a deserving heart, and that was enough. John watched Lily for a moment longer, her face radiating pure joy as she clutched the velvet box. She looked up once more, a silent, profound thank you in her eyes, before turning and slowly walking away, lost in her happiness. He felt a quiet sense of completion, a peaceful resolution washing over him. The mission, if he could call it that, was accomplished. He turned and began to make his way through the dwindling crowd, heading towards the exit. The noise of the auction house, which had once felt overwhelming, now seemed distant, a muffled hum. He felt lighter, a burden he hadn't even known he carried lifted from his shoulders. The disguise, which had felt like a necessary cage earlier, now felt comfortable, almost a second skin. He was John Smith. Again, the quiet man of the woods, but with a renewed sense of purpose, a deep satisfaction in his heart. He stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, inhaling deeply. The sun was lower in the sky, casting long shadows. He walked to his unassuming car, a model no one would ever associate with a legend, and started the engine. As he drove away, he glanced back at the old theater, its facade now bathed in the golden light of dusk. It was no longer just a place of commerce, but a place where a quiet, meaningful connection had been forged. The drive back to his cabin was serene. He didn't turn on the radio. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the soft murmur of his own thoughts. He thought about Lily, about her genuine passion, her unwavering dedication to the art of music. She was the embodiment of what he had always hoped his music would achieve: to inspire, to comfort, to connect. He had worried about his legacy, about how he would be remembered. Would it be just the jumpsuits and the hits, the spectacle and the fame? Or would the deeper meaning, the soul he poured into every note, endure? Today he had his answer. It endured in hearts like Lily's. It lived on in the quiet devotion of true fans who saw beyond the showmanship to the artist within. He thought of the handkerchief now in Lily's possession. It was just a small piece of cloth, yet it represented so much. A legendary concert, a moment of pure artistry, and now a silent passing of inspiration. He hadn't reclaimed a piece of his past. He had given a piece of his legacy to the future, and that felt infinitely more rewarding. As he pulled up the long, winding driveway to his cabin, the familiar silhouette of the oak trees against the twilight sky welcomed him home. The solitude no longer felt empty. It felt full, rich with the memory of the day's encounter. He had ventured out, taken a risk, and in doing so had found a profound sense of peace. He stepped inside, the familiar scent of wood smoke and old books greeting him. He didn't feel the need to pick up a guitar or read a book. He simply sat by the window watching the last slivers of light fade from the sky, a quiet smile on his face. Somewhere in a small town, a young woman was likely cherishing a simple white handkerchief, unaware of the true identity of her mysterious benefactor. She would continue to make music, to sing from the heart, carrying with her not just a piece of memorabilia, but a profound inspiration. And he, John Smith, the man who was once Elvis Presley, felt a deep and abiding contentment. His music lived on. His legacy was safe, not in display cases, but in the hearts of those who understood, who felt, who dreamed. He had come full circle, finding meaning, not in the roar of the crowd, but in the quiet, heartwarming echo of a single fan's devotion. He was home, truly home, at peace with his past and hopeful for the future of the music he loved.